Oh, I just forgot we have a video.
There's a part video.
The power's off. Okay, it's still off? Let me know when it goes back on. We'll watch the video. So the subject today is, what does it mean, Jesus, Son of Man? Today in the Christian tradition is Palm Sunday.
Oh, it's now.
And now we'll watch a video that will set the scene. Except I need the
Remote.
remote.
Again, there's a part.
Okay, but where is the remote? Okay, let's have it ready. There's a habit of mankind, people in general have this habit. They're trying to figure out exactly what's going on in various ways. Scientists are trying to figure out what's going on with physics and mechanical things, and philosophers are thinking about, I don't know, deep thoughts. And people in relationships are trying to figure out what's going on with that. In religion, there's a lot of debate about what is the correct story about any given subject. And the thing is that there's this major problem with religions in general, and that's that somebody tells a story, and one can either that they seem qualified to tell the story, or they're just a great storyteller. But at some point, somebody's story is believed. And so a group of people begin to believe that story, and they establish that story as the truth. Well, as oftentimes somebody may hear that story, and it could happen other ways, but they might hear that story, and then they travel to another country, another place, and they find a group of people who've never heard that story. So the opportunity comes, and they decide to share the story. But you see, they didn't make up the story, they only heard the story. So it's not necessarily probable even that they would tell the story exactly the same way. And so they would tell the story in their version of the story. And then the people who heard the story from them would tell others their version of the story. And then people from them who heard that story from them would tell another person their version of the story. And then you might think that one day that person would meet the storyteller and they would compare notes. And I mentioned this before. We have this game. It's called, in America, when you're growing up, it's called telephone or telegraph.
Chinese whisper.
Chinese whisper. Okay, I'm not familiar with that version of the story, but I suspect there's a similarity, which is that you start at this end of the line, and you see what happens when it gets to that end of the line. And rarely do they correspond exactly. And the thing is that it's the nature of many people to feel so strongly about their version of the story that they consider all other versions of the story to be false. Now, if it's, the recipe for your favorite meal, that's probably important to a lot of people, but maybe not the most important thing. But if it's a story about God and eternal life and the purpose of life, then people might give it more importance. And this is what's happened with all of the world religions, is that people have told stories, and these stories themselves become more important than the value that's presented through the lives and the purpose of those stories. And so people end up thinking that they're standing up for their good story and acting in ways that are exactly the opposite of the purpose of that story. It's interesting that the greatest avatars that are remembered in history, Rama, he was a noble. He was a king. He was royalty. Krishna, he was a noble. He was royalty. Buddha, he was a noble. He was royalty. Jesus was a carpenter's son. Yoganandaji, the son of an accountant. The story that is told about the incarnations of God, the disciples of each one of these masters tends to think, my master, my avatar is the avatar. And in the Christian tradition, which was born in the age of Kali Yuga, many people believe that Jesus was the only incarnation, the only Son of God, the only representative of God, and that this being was God himself, that God took a form. Now, in none of the other stories do you hear a story about an immaculate conception, unless you go back to Adam and Eve. I'm unaware of any stories like this in the Indian tradition, that a baby was born without physical conception.
Pandavas were born without any physical.
Okay, the Pandavas.
Karan was also.
Okay, I've forgotten that. Okay, good. So that doesn't ruin my story. And this proves a point. One of the points that I would make is that the story of all of the avatars is the same story. And the idea that we look at any of the avatars differently is mistaken. Except that they all came in certain times and represented certain unique qualities and messages that were appropriate for the times and the places in which they were manifest. And Jesus came at a time to say, look, everybody, the lowest person can know God, can be connected to their divinity. And this was a very powerful message when of course, the world was smaller then. The civilization was smaller. And people didn't have the people in the Middle East, they didn't have the stories of India generally available to them. And to see a larger picture of life's potential. And this, of course, was part of the consciousness of Kali Yuga, that everything becomes smaller and more concrete. So you tend to have this either or. It's black or white. It's solid or liquid. It's this or that. There's only one true answer. So it's very difficult for people who grow up with that consciousness to consider that there's more than one way to look at any given truth. One of the ways that Christians look at Jesus, and they argue about this, is was Jesus God or was Jesus man? Was he a man that was inspired, or was he God in the body? And Master pointed something out, that Jesus was a man, but Christ, the anointed, was the divine. And this is something that we need to realize, that it's not either or, it's both. It's not you can only, it's either one or the other. It's not that the masters need to be only separate from the creation. They're somehow not at all connected to it. And it's not that they're just people who have a little bit more inspiration than the average person. Now, today is the remembrance of Palm Sunday. It's the beginning of the week. You think of the work week. You think of a week in your life. And you think, well, what could happen in a week? You know, what could happen in a week? Well, in this particular week, Jesus traveled to Jerusalem in anticipation of the Passover celebration, which was the biggest spiritual holiday of the year. Remembering the exodus of the Jews from Egypt, their freedom and their journey back to the land of Judea. And there was this great celebratory feeling because the word had come around that Jesus had raised a man named Lazarus from the dead. That Lazarus had been interred in a cave, and Jesus had gone into the cave, and when he came out, Lazarus came with him. And the word had spread, and everybody was really excited. And the disciples got really excited because when they came into Jerusalem and people began to realize who was coming and everything, then they got all in an uproar. And they began to grab palm leaves, and lay them down on the ground and cry out in exaltation that this great prophet was there and had accomplished this incredible miracle. And of course, the disciples were pretty excited because, wow, we're getting some good press here. We'll get more followers this way. They were used to everybody kind of having a bad opinion about Jesus. Now it was turned around, and now they're thinking, sky is the limit. There's no limit to what we can do this week. This is like, woo! On the other hand, we know that Jesus knew what he was walking into. And Jesus as a man, you've got to think, well, this is not going to be a great week. It's going to be a tough week. But I signed up to do the job, I'm going to do it. By the end of the week, he was, he came in on Sunday. By Friday, he was being crucified. We talk about tough weeks, bad weeks, unexpected changes from most people's point of view. But Jesus did this role that he came to play for a purpose. And there are so many layers to these stories, to these exhibits of the lives of the masters, that it's impossible to capture the totality of the many aspects of this in any given period of time, really. But there's an aspect of this that I want to talk about today. The idea that Jesus lived 2,000 years ago. We know that Rama lived, I don't remember, 10,000 years ago. That Krishna lived 5,000, 1,000 years ago, that Buddha lived 4 or 5, I forget. Huh? 2,500 or so, okay. So, and yet it's interesting, these representatives of the divine are remembered. And this is the important part, not just remembered, but experienced. And this is key to understanding when we talk about Jesus as a Christ. When you talk about the Christ, you're talking about the omnipresent Spirit that is in the creation but untouched by it. The manifested God. God is beyond the creation, unmanifested, sought. But when God, as pure God in the creation, is taught, and only becomes diluted when it becomes Om, the creation. So the Christ, the Kutusta Chaitanya, is God, pure in its most pure manifestation. And this power is eternal, unchangeable, and yet ever new. And this is the Christ. So when we talk about Jesus as the Son of Man, Jesus was a human form with human thoughts, human expressions, a human life experience. But his consciousness was fully 100% identified with the omnipresent God consciousness that we call Christ consciousness, Krishna consciousness. Same, could be Rama consciousness, Buddha consciousness. This omnipresent consciousness. Now, we hear the stories about these great masters, and Yoganandaji was on this planet not that long ago. And it's easy for us to think, oh darn, I missed it. Darn. I came to the wrong school at the wrong time. But when we think that, we are making a big mistake. There's another saying that says, when the disciple is ready, the guru will come. Most people accept this, that somehow when you're ready for something like that, it comes to you. But what do we think the guru is? We keep thinking that the guru is a body. We think that the guru is a teaching. But that is not at all what the guru is. That's like describing a mango by the skin and not the inner fruit. The guru is God manifested. The guru is the God presence, the Christ presence. That presence is eternal. That presence is omniscient, omnipresent. It's always here, it's always present. And if you truly believe that your guru has come to you, then that guru has brought that presence. And that presence is not only in the body. Yes, the body, we love the body. The body is the temple. We like to go to the temple. The temple is easy to see. It's easy to touch. Remember in Swamiji's play, A Jewel in the Lotus, what's his name? I can't think of his name right now, but he's the merchant. And in the end, even though he's been inspired by the storyteller's journey, he says, I feel more comfortable with the temple. You can ask a question, but it doesn't talk back. It's easier to deal with those things because if it doesn't talk back, you don't have to face your challenges. You don't have to face the challenge of self-realization, the transformation that it calls us to. This is the greatest challenge in the creation. We are being asked to remember ourselves as infinite spirit. We are being asked to graduate from, take your name, Son of Man, and become your name, Son of God. This is what the Guru has come to give us. And that coming is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in each and every experience. Sister Gyanamata said something that was essentially important for us to remember. She said, where God has put me today, could I better find His presence? God has put us right here, right now. Now that doesn't mean we're seeing clearly what right here, right now is its purpose. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't grow forward. It doesn't mean we say, well, God has put me in the middle of the street, I should just stand here. No, God has given us the ability to grow, to expand, to seek. And this journey is something that we do as a dance with God. We are living a life, a journey that God has given us to live, but that journey has emotion. It has expansion. And our challenge is to seek that expansion. So we accept what God has given us. Jesus accepted that He had this challenging week to experience, but He recognized it as God's will for His life, and He entered into it actively. He didn't just, give up and say, okay, take me. He actively lived the purpose. He went into the temple and He chased the money changers out. He faced the Sanhedrin, the leaders of the Jewish faith, and He stood it with dignity, with wisdom. He even expressed humor in some of the ways that He dissolved their confusions. But He recognized that He was a representative of the divine. And the power that He brought, the way that He gave Himself to that, is part of the inspiration that we need to connect to awaken within our own selves. It's hard to imagine Jesus carrying a cross, dragging a cross up to the hill where He would be crucified. But we every day have our own little challenges, our own things that we face, things that bother us. Whether they be large or small in the eyes of others, they are our tests. And the key is not the test itself, but where do we put our attention during this test? And how do we come closer to God through it, rather than further? The man who came to Mount Washington, and he left one day saying, I didn't come here to mix cement. This was a great error on his part, thinking that cement had anything to do with it. He was there to be challenged, his spirit to be challenged. Will you give in to moodiness? Will you give in to your own personal vision of the way life should be? Or will you let the God presence guide your life, no matter what it looks like? Are you attached to comfort? Are you attached to nice clothes? Are you attached to keeping up with the neighbors' new cars and whatever outward thing that is not in itself bad? God made beautiful fruits. God made beautiful cars. It's okay. But if you let either one of those distract you from the bliss, then you have fallen from Eden. You have fallen from the garden. You have allowed yourself to become imprisoned by the senses. And we cut ourselves off from God's presence. So today we have a Sangha. I was reminded last night, Janaji was talking about some experience of when she first came to Ananda and met Swamiji and the effect that he had on her and others. And she said that Swamiji was the magnetism that held it all together. And I'm not disagreeing with her, but I want to emphasize what it was about Swamiji that allowed that to be true. Swamiji was not just a charismatic person with personal views about the way life should be. He was a representative of God and Guru. And he represented in such a way that it was incredibly powerful. But he was representing a truth that is always present. And the power of his magnetism made it easier. It was made easier. Can you imagine being in Master's presence? It would be easier. But not necessarily because it's so powerful, it's challenging. Imagine actually being aware that God is present all the time. When you're doing things that you think aren't your best representation. And to be aware that Swamiji said, Master knew all of my thoughts and proved it, and said that he knew them. That's a pretty intense circumstance. But we think, well, let me just say, it's easy to think that things would be better in some other time, in some other place. But what I say, and this is my observation of being around Swamiji and at Ananda all these years, it wasn't Swamiji himself that was the point. He was the catalyst for us to connect to the Christ presence, to the God presence. So yes, he made it easier for us, but he wasn't the power of it. He was, you might say, the most enthusiastic participant. If you go on an excursion with a group of people, and somebody is an experienced traveler and they're super enthusiastic, then you are more likely to be swept up in that energy. And what I observed is that, yes, we were inspired by his presence, but through that association, we learned how to connect to that presence without his physical presence. And as Yoganandaji said, get to know me inside. Don't just see the body, get to know the spirit. So when we get to know God inside, we recognize that the truth of life is that God is always present. When we as a group consciously attune ourselves to God, we are, let's say that the saints are super powerhouses, okay? If you, there's a computer example. You can have a mega computer, just a supercomputer. But something that years ago somebody discovered is that you can equal that supercomputer by connecting to a lot of little computers. And in fact, you can be greater than that if you have enough of those smaller in synchronization. This is the principle of satsang. This is why it was written, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I in the midst of them. We, as a family, have the power. We felt it last night. We feel it regularly. We have to consciously recognize that the Son of Man is us connected to Spirit. And not just philosophically, but of course it depends on where you think the body of Jesus Christ actually went after his passing. But we don't know that it was interred in any place that would confine it. And according to physics, the molecules that were in the body of Jesus Christ, we, each and every one of us, have some of those molecules in this physical form. This whole concept that we are individual and separate is a delusion. We can experience the Christ presence anytime we give ourselves fully to it. We have to practice that ability. And when the masters live as men, they're giving that example. They're saying, and here's how you, as a human being, a manifested spirit on the planet Earth, can grow and experience the divine presence in ever deeper ways. And this recollection is one of the things that we want to remind ourselves of when we remember the life of Jesus. And that he was the representative of the common man. And when we discuss this subject, it's the reminder that within every man, within every human being, the divine is present. Not fully blossomed, not fully purified. And we are all in different stages of purification, but if you've ever been in a forest meadow and seen the spring flowers, they are all in different stages of ripeness, of maturity. But if they were all perfectly the same, it would be not as beautiful. It would not tell the story of the variety and multitude expressions of the divine. But you see each and every one uniquely expressing in their own rhythm that divine story. This is what we've been called to. And we can see life on planet Earth as dirty and ugly and mean, or we can see it as a divine expression. And this is what the Masters call us to do. This is what Jesus so beautifully lived through his life. This ability to accept the role that he was given and then freely love everyone, embrace all, regardless of their point of view. And through that divine expression, there was a power that was manifested and that is eternally present, and that we can reach beyond people's opinions about whether Jesus was a God or Jesus was a man, and we can experience that presence for ourselves and make that assessment from our own experience. Namaste.
Just small point. What is the spiritual significance of Christ carrying his own cross, dragging his own cross up the hill?
Well, we all have to carry our challenges. And but if you remember, I believe it was Nicodemus who jumped out of the crowd and helped him carry it. And this, in many ways, is our role as disciples. We're asked, we can see that so clearly in this time, in this place, that we have been asked to help carry the mission of the Masters into the world. This is our cross. And of course we have our little crosses, our thorns, the things that bother us in life. But there's this much greater challenge. God isn't just asking us to bliss out, but God is inviting us to bliss out. But while we do that, we should bring others with us. So the cross, in Jesus' case, also represents the burden of all of life's, you might say, negativity and ugliness. And that he was willing to carry that weight. And of course, Christians believe that he absolved all souls for all time from their karma. Yoganandaji said that wasn't the case, but that he certainly did take a mass karma onto his shoulders. And that act was a part of that process. But again, we have a very limited view of the strings being pulled behind the scenes. So when we read the Bible, when we hear the stories, and even Master's interpretations of those stories, we have to remember that there's a whole infinite universe out there that a few words cannot possibly give you the complete picture. So again, when we look at these acts, these great acts of self-sacrifice, of divine manifestation, we should remember that their purpose is to inspire us, and in many ways to actively activate and promote our upliftment. They aren't things to be looked at it and, so there's this man whose talent is to climb up a very tall ladder, and I don't even know how tall it is now, but 100 feet, maybe more, I forget, and to dive down into a little pool that's only maybe a meter deep of water on concrete. And so this man gets up to the top of the ladder, and you would just, the guy's going to die. And yet he just goes like this and boom, lands on his chest, and he gets up and walks away. This is not the purpose of life. It's a great feat. I mean, wow. I mean, I couldn't do it. But this is, yes, we are born to entertain. But our purpose is much higher than outward feats of accomplishment. And this is the real story of the Masters. That our purpose is this divine accomplishment. Namaste.